Hey guys, today I'm down in Southern California getting hands-on with the best-selling three-row luxury SUV in America. This is the Acura MDX, and for 2025, it's received some important changes. Those changes are relatively subtle, but they mean that the MDX is a little bit sharper looking and definitely easier to use inside. That's important because there's some stiff competition in this segment thanks to the new Lexus TX, which is probably going to be the second bestseller in this segment by the end of the year. Let's see how the MDX stacks up. Acura opted for pretty subtle exterior changes for 2025, and honestly I think that was the right way to go, because at least to my eye, the MDX is the most attractive entry in this segment. That means we should talk about what this segment is. It's MDX, TX of course, XC90, Q7, QX60. Those are the most direct core competitors. You could expand this out to also include something like a CX90, Grand Cherokee L, BMW X7, etc., but most of the German options are going to be more expensive, and of course Mazda and Jeep don't have the same sort of brand cachet that we find with Acura. Now versus the two closest competitors, the Volvo and the Lexus, I think the Acura has the right blend of elegant but also aggressive in terms of its style. We have the angry LED headlights. These have been subtly tweaked for 2025. Mostly it's just the tint. The tint inside is darker, making them look, angrier. We then have different grille inserts in the diamond pentagon grille there, different little squiggles down here on the lower grilles as well. There are several different front end looks. If you get Type S or A-Spec, this one is the most expensive model available. It's the Type S. Then we have these black grille inserts right here for extra cooling in the Type S. If you get the rest of the lineup, we get more of a elegant, clean bumper design, and if you get the top-end advanced trim without A-Spec or Type S, then all the black bits around the body become body-colored to give it more of a luxury car vibe. There are a bunch of different reasons that the MDX has been so successful. This isn't just currently the best-selling three-row luxury SUV, it's the best-selling luxury three-row SUV of all time in North America. And part of that is its size. It's 198.4 inches long, so significantly smaller than something like an Escalade or a Navigator or a Wagoneer, and that means it's going to be a lot easier to park. It's also more efficient than any of those options as well. You might want to cross-shop this versus something like the brand new Infiniti QX80, because even though this is a lot smaller on the outside, it's actually about the same size in some dimensions on the inside. And that's really the beauty of this particular segment. You get great packaging efficiency because this is not a body-on-frame SUV, so there's less space wasted underneath the vehicle versus something like the Navigator or the Escalade. This is about 5 inches shorter than its new Lexus competitor, and there's another difference between this and the TX. It's the roofline. You'll notice that with the TX, they actually kept a lot of the same shapes from the Grand Highlander, so it's big and it's boxy in the rear. And that boxiness is really important. It's not just the 5 inches extra length, it's the fact that that box is squarer and the top is more than 5 inches. So from this point to the back end top roof line of the Lexus TX, it's about 18 inches longer in that Lexus. That means it does have a much larger third row and a much larger cargo area. But versus the Infiniti, the Volvo, the Cadillac, etc., this is right in line with something like the XT6 or the XC90. The base wheel design remains the same as 2024, but we get new 20 and 21-inch wheels in the other trims. Again, this is the Type S model, so we get the widest tires available, 275 width tires on these 21-inch wheels versus the base 255 width. The Type S also gets some extra tweaks. We get the adaptive air suspension system. It's not offered in any other MDX. We get different sway bars front and rear, bigger Brembo brakes up front, and self-sealing tires. It's worth noting that the Type S does not have a spare tire due to the extra size of the wheel and the tire. The adaptive air suspension gives us between 6.7 and 9.4 inches of clearance. Since this is parked and turned off, this is actually the lowest height mode. A regular MDX would be ever so slightly higher, and then if you put this in its highest height mode, it pumps itself all the way up to 9.4 inches. That's also made possible by the fact that we don't have a McPherson strut front suspension, like we find in the Lexus and the Infiniti competition, just to name a few. Double wishbone suspensions are a little bit more elegant, and they're better able to handle suspension geometry changes with an adaptive height air suspension. That's why we also find them in vehicles like the Audi Q7 and the Volvo XC90. It definitely lends itself towards the handling mission that we find in the MDX as well. Styling changes are even more subtle in the rear than they were up front. Basically, we get tinted taillight modules, a little bit darker than before, but still full LEDs with amber turn signals. Same quad exhaust tips down there in the Type S. If you get the advanced package, as I said before, without Type S or A-Spec, then all the black trim becomes body colored, including the wheel arches, etc. I like that look a bit more. Let me know what you think about that. Do you think Acura should have given us an option on the Type S to get the body colored lower valence and trim strips in the back? I think it would have made the Type S look a little sportier, a little bit sleeker. Before we move on, let me quickly show you the difference between the Type S and the A-Spec. The grille insert, it's actually different. It's sort of a crosshatch pattern instead of that more 3D egg crate style. And then down here, even though we get the same blacked out treatment and very similar grille, this is not actually functional. So there's actually a cooling function in the Type S. Here, it's just a blacked out trim. Then instead of the 275 width tires, we find narrower 255 millimeter tires and the regular brake package from the rest of the MDX lineup. And in the back, no quad exhaust tips. Instead, we get these more oval dual exhaust tips. If you're not a fan of small turbocharged engines, you want to check out the MDX because this has one of the few naturally aspirated V6 engines in the entire luxury segment, let alone luxury SUVs. It's a 3.5-liter V6 producing 290 horsepower, and you'll find that in every MDX except for the Type S. Because of course, if you want Type S levels of fun, you need a turbo, and that's where this engine comes in. It's a 3-liter version of that 3.5-liter V6 with a single turbo, cranking that power all the way up to 355 horsepower and torque up to 354, nearly 100 more pound-feet of torque than we find in the base engine. The downside is fuel economy, 19 miles per gallon combined in the Type S versus 21 miles per gallon for the naturally aspirated all-wheel drive model. Of course, the most efficient version is going to be the base engine with front-wheel drive. Both engines are mated to a 10-speed automatic transmission, and the Acura Super Handling all-wheel drive system continues to be a really novel all-wheel drive system in this segment. Basically, what Acura does is they drive the rear wheels a little bit faster than the front wheels. That allows them to send up to 70% of engine power to the rear wheels under certain driving conditions and certain engine output levels. That does not mean that 70% of the 354 pound-feet of torque can go to the rear all the time, but it does mean that more power can go to the back whenever the car wants to than something like a Volvo XC90 or a Cadillac XT6 or an Infiniti QX60 or of course that Lexus TX. So it's not just about the extra power we get under the hood and the bigger displacement engines, it's also about the fact that this is not quite BMW levels of tail happy, but on a gravel road like we're on here, it's surprisingly close. Front seat comfort and front seat adjustability is an area where sometimes Acura and also Lexus have lagged behind the German competition, but not anymore with the Type S because we get one of the most adjustable seats in this segment, and I think actually one of the best massage functions in this segment as well. We have inflatable side bolsters, 4-way adjustable lumbar support, power extending thigh cushion, and again that front seat massage. The passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat. What's nice about this massage function is that it's not just 3 airbags inflating and deflating in there, it's a number of different all the way across the seat bottom cushion and back cushion, and they really do press awfully hard on the back, which is something that I really appreciate. Of course, these seats are also heated and ventilated. There's a 3-position memory over there, and we have a powered tilt telescopic steering column. Jumping into the back seat, we find pretty similar combined legroom figures in the Infiniti, the Acura, the Cadillac, and the Volvo. And by Cadillac, I mean the XT6, not the Escalade. But you will find more room in the Lexus TX. It's actually quite a lot more legroom, about 5 more inches total. Still, this is pretty comfortable. With this front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, you can see I have maybe about 4 inches of legroom left, and we still have the really handy removable center seat in the MDX. This is my personal preference over dedicated captain's chairs. Every MDX is going to be 7 seats. There's no 8-seat version, and you can basically make it a 6-seat vehicle by either folding this and using this as an armrest or pulling this other little piece of webbing up here, and then you can undock this and basically turn it into a captain's chair. Now, this is not the lightest module. It's not the hardest. I'll just go ahead and hand this to Travis because I want to show you the seat latches. These stay behind, of course, when the seat has been removed, and Acura does not currently have any sort of snap-in cover or rubber mat that would go over that. The reason I mention that is because I have a family friend that has small children and an MDX, and the kids always seem to trip right here over these latches on their way to the way back. But while we're here, I should also show you the center console. We have a 12-volt power outlet, some USB-C charge ports there, air vents, 3-zone automatic climate control in this model and heated outboard seats. Not ventilated though, and that is a function you will find in some of the competition. All right, let's go ahead and try out the third row. We have an easy electric tilt slide mechanism for the second row seats. And I'm gonna have Travis just hop into that second row so we can see what it's like to put 2 adults back here. How much legroom you got there, Travis?
Just enough.
Okay, and you know, back here in the third row, I have just enough. I could actually squeeze my feet over here behind Travis. Headroom, that's more of the rational problem back here in the third row. Not a lot. You'll find considerably more in the Lexus TX. Of course, more in those full-size SUVs as well. But if you're sitting a little bit further forward and you want to take some kids to lunch, or you have coworkers, you could easily fit 6 coworkers in here if you needed to. There's no middle seat, of course, in the third row. That's one thing that I would really love to see at least one luxury manufacturer do, because there just aren't any 8-seat options in this segment. While we're back here, I should mention that the center seat belt for the middle position does come out of the ceiling right here. So if you are planning on putting a child seat in the middle and you're using a shoulder belt, or if you just use a shoulder belt all the time, know that that is going to be in the way of passengers getting in and out of the back. It doesn't just come out of the seat back. Going in for a closer look, we have carpet instead of hard plastics for the side of the third row area, although we still have a hard plastic armrest, cup holders for the third row seating positions, USB charge ports right there, although they are just regular USB-As, and you can see the cargo tie downs right there, because realistically, most folks are probably going to leave the third row folded most of the time. Now, before we go up front, I should show you one last thing, and that is you don't necessarily have to worry about that shoulder belt being in the way with child seats, because we have 3 sets of latch anchors in here. Kind of an unusual twist. We actually have latch anchors in this removable center seat position. Behind the power hatch, we find a reasonable amount of cargo capacity, around 16 cubic feet. That's enough to have 2 of these 22-inch roller bags here side by side in this position with some extra luggage up top. But there's not quite enough room for some of these larger bags to sit in this position. The hatch just won't close. Now, if you want a bit more storage space, you can get something like the Lexus TX. That's going to take this cargo area all the way up to over 20 cubic feet. It's a really, really big storage area in the back. But there is some storage space under the floor, but it's the exact same amount of space we find in the regular MDX, even though we don't have a spare tire in the Type S. And that's because the spare tire would actually go underneath the vehicle. This is the little port where you'd lower that spare tire down, but that space is just completely unoccupied in this model. Of course, again, most folks are going to have the third row folded most of the time. A cool button you won't find in most luxury SUVs is this little button over here. It's sort of a person icon getting eaten by some sort of giant clam. What it does is you press the button and then you toss the key out, or you walk away, and it lets the power hatch close. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that this is the top-end Type S trim, so clearly there are going to be things in here you won't find in the base model. Up here we have the controls for the big panoramic moonroof and a sunglass holder. We also have slide-to-the-side sun visors, and here's what that big panoramic moonroof looks like. It goes to almost the second row passengers' heads. Back there we have Travis, so everybody wave there to Travis. You can see he does have headroom back there, even with that big pano roof. The driver and the front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts, 4-way adjustable headrests, and you can see those well-integrated sunshades from this angle. On the backs of the front seats, you'll notice it's not upholstered in leather like the front. This is actually a hard plastic insert that helps improve durability. So if you've got kids in child seats that are constantly kicking the backs of your seats, you want those hard plastic inserts versus leather. Speaking of leather, it's not standard in the MDX. The base model gets imitation leather, but every other version gets some version of leather upholstery. This is the more expensive seat design that you find in the Type S and also in the advanced trim. I really like the contrast in this design, but I think the seat looks even better in the dark blue and in the sort of baseball glove brown design. The top-end trims also get the unique stitch patterns that we find in this seats and the ultra suede inserts right there. That's an imitation suede product, kind of like Alcantara. Moving over to the front doors, lots of soft touch materials are going on the upper section of the doors, and real wood trim, which is something that we don't find in the Lexus TX for some reason. That's actually a bit of a surprise. A lot of the recent Lexus models have ditched wood, but Acura is doubling down on it. We also have a wood trim strip running right here across the dashboard, although there is still plenty of piano black in here, which is not exactly my favorite. That is definitely going to scratch more easily over time, and it really does show the dust nicely. In the middle of everything, we see the biggest change for 2025, which is that we get a touchscreen infotainment system and the screen has been moved several inches closer to the driver. That's a big change. Previously, the MDX had that kind of silly touchpad thing going on down here. Apparently, a lot of drivers, a lot of actual Acura owners did not like it. I know that a lot of folks will get used to it over time, but it really does appear that customers drove this change, at least that's what Acura says. So they have moved to a touchscreen interface, which is significantly easier to use. It also has newer updated software features like the built-in Google Assistant, the Google Play Store, built-in Google Mapping, etc. And now because of that built-in Google Mapping, you can get a moving map display in the instrument cluster. I will show you that in just a second. The touchscreen again features built-in smartphone integration, wired or wireless CarPlay and Android Auto, and it can either occupy that large portion of the screen or you can shrink it down and get the built-in widgets over there on that side if you'd rather. Moving down from there, we have two big air vents. Again, lots of shiny black plastic. That's really my only complaint in here. I would have loved to have seen some other textures that maybe didn't show scratches or dust quite so easily. Controls for the 3-zone automatic climate control system happen right there in the middle. Ventilated seats, heated seats, the auto function for those seats, which will heat or ventilate depending on the conditions outside. And then this is the massage button. Instead of making you dig through menus, I love the fact that Acura gives us a ton of buttons here. Now, if you want to adjust the massage, you press and hold the button. Then it's going to bring you to this screen where you can see all the various different massage functions. They're quite a lot actually for the driver and front passenger. They can be adjusted independently of one another. But again, this is one of the better massage functions in this segment. Down here we have the enormous drive mode button. This allows us to toggle between the various different drive modes, including the lift mode. That's how you're going to get the highest ride height of over 9 inches there. Going back, we have the hunt and peck shifter that we've seen in Acuras before. Drive, neutral, we pull back for reverse, press that button for park there. Not the most intuitive thing, it does occupy a lot of space. I kind of wish we'd had a different design, but that is still hanging out. We have the automatic brake hold button there. Under this little pop-up, we have some USB charge only ports. The volume knob is still over here, as is track forward, backward. My only concern about that is drinks may be easy to spill on those buttons. Of course, the duplicate buttons on the steering wheel. Small storage cubby there. Really big wireless charging mat right now in the middle. The previous one was considerably smaller than this. This is a lot easier for those larger smartphones to charge. There's some little bumps to help you guide your smartphone into the right place, and it seemed to have no problem charging through some of the thicker cases. Big cup holders over here as well. One is a little bit taller than the other. So if I put this small drink in there, you'll see it's kind of difficult to get that coffee out, but it's a little bit easier in the front one. Large takeout drinks shouldn't really be a problem. Under the center armrest, we have a 2-tiered storage area. Small amount of storage there, actually surprisingly on the small side for a vehicle like this. And then we get a small tray just above that. On the driver's side, we have a color heads-up display housed in a big binnacle over the big full LCD instrument cluster. The software behind the LCD cluster is pretty similar to last year's. You can change the gauge layout between this advanced layout and what they call a crafted layout, which is basically some dials. The only major change in here is the addition of built-in Google Mapping, as you can see right there. That's not going to offer smartphone projection mapping. So if I'm mapping with a destination on my phone, then the cluster changes to more simple arrow displays rather than having a 2-screen display being driven by your smartphone. And then if I cancel the routing on the smartphone, then it's actually going to go back to that navigation display. Now, 2-screen CarPlay or Android Auto projection is not supported, so if I start a route via CarPlay, this system moves to simple arrows instead of that moving map display. Moving out from there, the steering wheel looks pretty familiar, but it's actually a different wheel because it now has a capacitive sense function in it. So instead of simply using a torque sensor to tell if you're paying attention while you're driving, it's actually going to know whether you're touching the steering wheel or not for the lane keeping assistance and other active safety systems to function properly. We have paddle shifters on the back, lots of buttons on the front steering wheel. These mainly have to do with the infotainment system. There's also a heated steering wheel button there, and these mainly have to do with the adaptive cruise control and the lane centering system, but this button also controls that multifunction LCD cluster. And last but not least, we have the Bang & Olufsen audio system. Interestingly, you're going to find a Bang & Olufsen audio system in every version except for the base trim of the MDX, but of course you're going to get the most speakers if you get the most expensive MDX. This is an over 30 speaker sound system with well over 1,000 watts of power. Part of me is a little surprised that we don't find power pop-up speaker grills like we find in some vehicles with Bang & Olufsen audio systems, but Acura probably was more concerned with longevity and repairability of some of those components. So we find fixed speakers everywhere with the Bang & Olufsen logo here and there, several speakers in the doors and in that A-pillar, also lots of speakers up here in the ceiling, of course. All right, it's time to get the MDX out on the road, and this is, not a well-paved road.
No, we got to be a little bit more careful on this than a windy open back road.
So if I am suddenly seesawing the steering wheel, it's because some of these holes you could lose an entire Integra in. But I think it's actually a good road to demonstrate the Type S, because this is not necessarily about the ultimate in 0 to 60 acceleration. This model's about 6 seconds 0 to 60. That's about what we got last time we tested the Type S. Acura says it's a little bit quicker, but it just occurred to me, we have actually not had the MDX Type S at home for an official 0 to 60 test.
Like you said, it's not going to be the ultimate 0 to 60 machine, but what it is really good at is handling, and a pretty diverse realm of handling. It's going to be better on the better pavement, but it's still suitable for less than ideal pavement, which is not always the case when you get a good handling vehicle.
And that's where, this is interesting, because this is the sportiest version, but it's the only one with the adaptive air suspension. Currently, the suspension is set to comfort, and that's really the interesting thing about the MDX is this is, of course, the sporty model, but it's also the best riding model, so the most appropriate, really, for this particular road surface. And Acura's done a really good job with their first adaptive air suspension, something that, honestly takes some companies a really long time to refine. This has a nice level feel to it. It feels pretty direct, pretty engaging. The turn-in is really nice in the steering, and the steering ratio is just about perfect for this. This is just so much more engaging to drive than any of the body-on-frame competition. Another reason that the MDX has been such a good seller.
Yeah, it's great to have the variability here in the suspension feel, and like you said, it translates really well to the performance side of things, but it would be nice to see some of that comfort being applied to some of the lower models as well.
Yes, exactly, and that is one thing I said over and over again, is I would just love to see just the adaptive air suspension brought down to another trim. Maybe not the A-Spec, but something like the Tech package or the Advanced package. I think it would just fit the personality of the MDX really well. And also expand the pool of interested shoppers, since there's so many German competitors that have air suspensions either standard or optional in pretty low levels.
Yeah, it's definitely one thing you find in the luxury segment is a desire to have a comfortable ride. And the fact that you have to get the performance-oriented model to get the more comfortable ride is a bit of a juxtaposition and not something you have to do in other models and other contenders. And I do think it would only help MDX sales.
Now we're in Sport Plus, by the way, guys. I've been twiddling with the knobs. Now we're in Sport Plus, so we get a little bit more digitally augmented engine noise in here, but also some important other changes. So if I actually come to a stop here, you'll notice that the idle speed of the engine has actually been raised up a little bit to reduce turbo lag. So it's actually right there at just over 1,000 RPM. That does give you a bit more punch right from the get-go if you're not brake torquing the engine, and slightly faster shifts, they say. Then we get slightly revised super handling all-wheel drive programming, and you can really feel that Acura is pretty aggressive at sending more power to the rear and torque vectoring across the rear to, again, give this more of that rear-wheel drive dynamic. The other thing worth noting about super handling all-wheel drive is if we just floor it in this left turn there, it doesn't have that rear end stepping out feel that you find in a true rear-wheel drive vehicle, because it can't send that much power to the rear. But because it can torque vector across the rear and send a reasonable amount of power to the rear, it certainly feels very sure-footed. It has a little bit of outward swing to the rear end, but it's never going to be tail happy like you would find in the average rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive entry in this segment. If you did that same maneuver, we probably would have ended up in the curb if we had just kept it floored and simply steered. And with this, it's basically a point and shoot. You just point it where you want to go and you stab the throttle, and it's really, really easy to drive.
Yeah, basically in the worst case scenario, it comes out neutral.
Now we should talk about some of the other things that they say they've improved for this year. We haven't been able to verify these just yet, but we do get laminated rear windows now. We also get some extra sound deadening in every version except the base model. So they're saying this is now going to be quieter out on the road. Honestly, I actually didn't think that they needed to do that, because I already thought the MDX was relatively quiet in this segment, but I always appreciate a little bit of extra comfort. Speaking of which, let's dial this knob back to comfort.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, if you are going to make an effort to make it a little bit more enjoyable experience here in the cabin, that's one more reason I think that adaptive suspension could have made it through, because if it's quieter, again, you're appealing to a different audience, maybe a more German audience. That's going to be your main competitor on that end of things, but it's definitely a plus, and I think people will appreciate it.
We should also talk about the expanded safety systems. So the Acura Watch suite of things has been upgraded for 2025, so we get extra radars. They're now hidden behind the bumpers for a cleaner look, for better lane watching, better blind spot detection, and we now have a feature that I find actually a little bit on the silly side, and that is we have automated lane changing, but no hands off the wheel steering assistance system. So it's not like the licensed Super Cruise like they do in the ZDX. It's not happening here in the MDX. We have more aggressive lane centering than before, a capacitive touch steering wheel, so that way it knows that your hands are actually on the wheel rather than just simply applying a little bit of torque here and there. But if all the conditions are met, you can tap the turn signal stalk for an extended period, and then it will help guide you into that lane change. Just not sure about that.
It's not a reason to go ahead and trade in your 24 for your 25 MDX. It's a step in the right direction. Obviously, as autonomous driving assist features come through, it shows that they're making progress. It means that their machines are learning. They're able to do a little bit more with it, but it's a very small thing. I think you find it in a lot of other vehicles as well, but it's not nearly the improvement to a hands-free system.
And it's billed a little bit as a sort of safety system. So the car is going to monitor what's going on in that lane. It's not going to let you change lanes into a car. It's going to do it the safest way possible. It's going to make sure there's a really big gap, etc. It's not going to just cut its way into the lane line, or into the other lane rather. I'm just not sure why I need that feature versus just simply blind spot detection, where it would just beep at me and go, hey, there's someone there, you probably shouldn't change lanes.
I think the other thing is when you get so many specific criteria that have to be met, you find that it doesn't work every time that you want it to work. So it could be a point of frustration. But again, it's new for Acura here, but it's not brand new across the line. So some people will appreciate it and they'll find places that it works, and otherwise people would probably just ignore it.
Yep. The drive has all of a sudden become boring because we're behind a bunch of trucks, so it's a good time to talk about fuel economy. This is EPA rated for 19 miles per gallon, bearing in mind that we have gone up to about 4,000 feet of elevation here. We've averaged 15.5 miles per gallon. That is one thing I've noted with the MDX and the Type S in our first drive and our last drive at home as well. You know, they're not the most efficient entries in this segment. A lot of that honestly just has to do with super handling all-wheel drive. It's always active and it's always trying to send a decent amount of power to the rear. And because it's overdriving the rear wheels, there's a certain amount of, the rear wheels and the front wheels fighting sometimes. It's probably not the best terminology. I'm sure Honda and Acura would disagree with that in their IVTM and super handling all-wheel drive systems.
Yeah.
But this is one of those you have to pay to play kind of situations. If you want this kind of handling ability, the MDX feels really sharp, then you're going to have to give up some fuel efficiency for that. Now let's get down to brass tacks. How much is the MDX going to set you back? Well, be prepared to pay more than last year because of the way that Acura has reshuffled the options deck. This is going to start at $52,250 plus $2,200 if you want all-wheel drive on the base model. Now, the base model is not going to have everything that we see in this model, and importantly, it's not going to have leather seats, it's not going to have the extra sound insulation, and it's not going to have the new Bang & Olufsen audio system. If you want some of those extra touches, like the 19-speaker audio system, the leather upholstery, extra sound deadening, the laminated glass in the rear, ambient lighting, front and rear parking sensors, etc., you have to get the tech package. That's $57,650, and all-wheel drive is still optional on that model, but it's going to get you a lot of the things that I think most shoppers want on the inside of their MDX. If you want most of the niceties that we saw on this interior, like the massaging seats, ventilated seats, real wood trim, the LED fog lights, 360-degree camera, and of course the body-colored trim, you'll find that on the advanced trim for $62,850, and all-wheel drive becomes standard on that particular model. If you like the looks of the Type S, but you don't want Type S power, then you want the A-Spec trim. That's going to start at $67,350, go up to $70,250. But if you want everything, if you want the ultimate MDX, you want this one, $76,340. That's a decent price bump over the advanced trim or the A-Spec trim with similar looks, but remember, you don't just get the extra power, which for me at least would be one entire reason to get the MDX Type S. You also get the adaptive air suspension. And that's something, honestly, I would have loved to have seen Acura drop down to the advanced trim, because this is the best riding MDX. It's the sportiest, it's also the best riding, it's the best handling. It's just the best MDX, and part of me wishes that some of this was available in a lower end trim for lower pricing. How does it compare to the competition? Well, as before, the MDX is still a pretty decent deal. You can get an adaptive air suspension in an XC90, but most XC90s are going to cost you more than the MDX. And they're probably going to be more expensive to keep around in the long run. That's one big benefit historically for Acura and Lexus, is lower long-term operational and maintenance costs. Everything from filters, air filters, oil changes, etc. at the Acura dealer, likely to be less expensive than at the Audi, the BMW, or Mercedes dealer, likely also versus the Volvo XC90. Now, it doesn't have as much room as the Lexus TX. In my mind, the toughest competitor is the Lexus TX, the closest competitor is the XC90. So let's talk about those two. The XC90, a little bit more expensive than this. The plug-in hybrid is where it's at for that XC90. That's where it really shines. You get 27 miles per gallon, significantly more than this, and you get more power, 455 horsepower. It's way faster 0 to 60, and it's a hoot and a half to drive. It's not quite as dynamic in some ways because the power output is a little weird with so much power on the back, but a lot of power on the front and no connection, but it's definitely very, very swift. The TX is the tougher competitor because, of course, it's a Lexus and it has all of that Acura Lexus reliability baked into its price tag, and it has a really, really big back seat. Strangely enough, it doesn't actually seat any more people than this because they chose not to give it a 3-person third row, but that third row is enormous and the cargo area is bigger. But so is the price tag. The TX is definitely pricey. You get some hybrids tossed into the mix and a plug-in hybrid available, but they actually can get more expensive than this Type S right here. So you just have to choose. Do you want the extra room? Do you want the extra fuel economy? Or do you want the vehicle that's more fun and, honestly, I think more attractive? The Type S, I think, is just more handsome outside and more attractive inside as well. Oddly enough, it also has real wood trim, something that Lexus has strangely run away from. You'll find real wood trim in the advanced trim and in the Type S, of course, as well, and you won't find it in any version of the Lexus TX. So let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Did Acura do enough with the MDX? If I could change just one thing on this car, I think it would be to resurrect the 3-liter hybrid system that Acura used to use in a previous generation of MDX. That was just over 300 horsepower, it was reasonably efficient, and it was definitely a decent amount of fun. I would love to see a reboot of that hybrid system under this hood, maybe next year. I know it's a long shot, it's probably never going to happen, but if I could change one thing, that would certainly be it. Be sure and let us know what you think about that down there in the comment section. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, X, Threads, blah, 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 all that other social stuff. And of course, you can also call that number down there at the bottom of your screen if you want to leave us commentary or questions for future podcast episodes and live shows. We're going to be doing some of that coming up soon. We're going to be rebooting that, so be sure call that number, drop us a question or a comment if you want to know about the 10-speed automatic transmission, how it works, how cars get built, how they get feature setted, whatever we want to call that term, etc. Let us know down there, give us a call, and I'll see all of you later.